God created heaven and earth. And so, what that tells me is that if I want to get to know God, I need to study heaven and earth. In the same way that if there is an artist who lives in another country and I cannot meet him and I cannot get to know him in person, but the best way to get to know that artist is to take a look at his art. If it's a musician, if I listen to all his music, I start to get a very good insight into the soul of that human being. And so it is like that also, that when I study the natural world, it begins to give me a deep insight into the creator of that world. And that's why it is that from the 17th century all the way into the 20th century, the overwhelming majority of great scientists who starting with Isaac Newton at the end of the 1600s, the great scientists who uncovered the secrets of mechanics and of gravity and of magnetism and of electricity and of optics and of chemistry, these were all deeply religious, Bible-believing Christians, and that makes a lot of sense because when you are searching for something, it helps to know where it is. And so if I ask my children to help me find my car keys, and they say, well, where did you last see them? And I say they could be anywhere. Nobody goes into the search with a lot of enthusiasm. But if I say to them, look, I know I lost them in the living room, they're somewhere in this room, then everybody starts scurrying around trying to find them because they know they will find them. They are reachable, they are there. What the beginning of the Bible tells us is that in the same way that God is one, so the world it created also has a reflection of him, and that there are patterns. And so people who were religious, people who were Bible believers, immediately said that their Christian faith informed them that they should expect to find patterns in the world. And so they started searching and measuring, and pretty soon they found formulae that showed that the force of electrostatics has the same shape as the force of gravity. And these discoveries opened the way forward. Well, in exactly the same way, um, the the cultures that were linked to the Bible began to produce economic wealth at a far greater rate than countries that were not. And to this very day, pockets of Christian believers financially outperform atheistic areas. As a matter of fact, whether you look at the Soviet Union or Cuba or anywhere else, no atheistic regime has ever successfully created a viable and sustainable economy. It is because money is faith based.
Mm.
And so if you do not have any access to a faith based vision of the world, you are very handicapped when it comes to money. Does that make sense to you all?
Yeah, it does. I mean, it's interesting when you say money is faith based, and when you're referencing Isaac Newton, the scientist, and what came to me immediately is one definition of science, which he's alleged to have said. Many which he said, science is man discovering what God has done. And so many of scientists in it said that, and it's interesting the point you just made that a lot of the communist countries who don't believe in what creation per se, they believe in spending, so to speak, have been unable to create sustained wealth. That's very true. That's
Yeah.
very that's very true. And then I
Yes,
also,
very much so.
yeah, yeah, and also just aligning on the point you made concerning the wealth. One of the reasons why Europe became, if you like, very prosperous and for a long time, the font of progress and civilization was because of the knowledge that came from Jerusalem, into Europe, and then they prospered by it greatly.
Yes.
And that's, for me, that's one of the concerns now. I mean, as in my role, my campus as a Bible scholar, as a theologian, as a pastor, that Europe seems to be turning its back on
No,
the foundation of its
it's
prosperity.
it's very obvious. Also, the United States has turned its back. The last 60 years, the United States has turned its back on its biblical origins, and we are seeing the results right now. Inflation is a moral failing. It's not a mechanical failing. Inflation isn't because some unimaginable outside force suddenly began exerting its baleful influence. No, inflation is when a government is detached from its moral roots and begins to print money. Well, that's what's going on in the United States of America. Today, holding dollars is a very dangerous proposition because they are losing value every single month.
Thank you. So we'll go to the studio. Please go ahead. Come in, Dr. Daisy, Ruby, and Emma. I think you have. Please go ahead.
Hello, Rabbi Daniel, all the way from Aberdeen. So yes, we are at the studio. My name is Oribi, and I have with me Dr. Daisy by my right, Mr. Inyoma by my left, and we're so excited for the opportunity.
Well, it's wonderful. I'm very happy to see you. Is there any way that we could raise the level of your audio, because I'm having trouble hearing you?
We're not able to pick it. All right, is the volume better now?
Yes. I've got it as high as I've got it as high as I can at my end. It's not great, but I think we'll be able to manage.
Okay, wonderful. I mean, our first question today, I was just really curious about you, and what was it like growing up, and just a little more about yourself. What was it like growing up? Have you always known about money? Were you always this knowledgeable about making money?
Well, I'm actually the least interesting part of the whole discussion, I promise you. But the ancient Jewish wisdom is really what's most interesting. But I grew up in Africa. I grew up in South Africa as a child. And when I was 10 years old, I was sent to go to school in the United Kingdom. And much of my schooling was about, I'm going to say, about 150 miles south of Aberdeen, in a city called Newcastle. And no, I didn't always know about money, but I began to make a study of it because I was curious to try and understand something which is obvious to anybody with eyes in their head, but which was not considered a polite question, and that is, why are Jews so good with money? And I figured that as a Jewish rabbi, I could safely ask that question without being accused of bigotry. And so I did ask that question, and then it led me to a little more than 10 years of serious and dedicated study to try and understand the secrets of money and what accounts for the disproportionate success that the Hebrew people have with money. So that's pretty much the background to the question you asked.
Yes, thank you very much. That's
Sure.
very insightful. So we can I read the introduction, and it was quite interesting. I think it was one of the reasons why you decided to write the book when you were in America and you were in a new church, and you told yourself that you were going to own your own business and you were not just going to be a rabbi that worked in the church or synagogue or place of worship. And that interaction was after a naming ceremony, envelope is passed through, and there's this feeling, a sense of discomfort when it comes to money. I found that very interesting, and I also had to reflect on myself that yes, sometimes the conversation about money can seem uncomfortable. I was curious just before I hand the mic to Mr. Nyoma. Did you experience that? Were you uncomfortable with money at some point?
Oh yeah, sure.
Yeah.
I saw it. I saw it most noticeably once when my wife and I asked a young girl from down the street to come and babysit for us, and she came over, and our children immediately took to her, and she obviously was very good with them. So my wife and I went out with a light heart, and when we came home, we found the children, the younger ones were asleep, the older ones were doing their homework, all the dishes had been done, the house was tidy, and we were really impressed with this young girl. And so I said to her, "This is fantastic. We really appreciate it. You did very well. How much do I owe you?" And I saw her eyes go down to her feet. She looked down, and her foot started moving in patterns on the carpet as she was obviously uncomfortable. And I just waited, and eventually she sort of looked up shyly and she said, "Would $20 be okay?" And I said, "No, it wouldn't." And she said, "Oh, sorry, would 15 be okay?" And I said, "No, you're going in the wrong direction. I think $30 would be okay." And she startled and she looked. And I said, "Because you did a great job. That's what it was worth to us. And we'd like to be able to call you again. And when we call you again, we'd like you to say, 'Oh, yeah, I'd like to go work for them. We don't want to underpay you. And you should not be embarrassed to tell us how much money you want. That's the service. That's how it works.'" And it reminded me of how important it was to clarify and develop a comfort with the idea that money is part of God's plan for human interaction, and that money represents the service that I have provided to another one of God's children. And so there's nothing to be embarrassed about. And then I started exploring why it is that so many people are embarrassed about money. And when I discovered that, it was an eye-opener to me.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I think that's quite interesting from your point of view. So, Mr. Nyoma, over to you.
Yes, thank you so much, Rabbi, who've been reading through this book for the past month.
Yes.
A lot that we've learned, so many concepts that we've learned. One question I will want to ask, it's something that you wrote under the introduction, and we were, during one of our group discussions, we had a lot of discussion on that. And you said that at some point in your life, you possessed huge theoretical knowledge about finance, about business, about money. But for some reason, it wasn't translating to better performance in your business. So we were trying to understand or find out how did you, in practical terms, now translate this huge knowledge that you had into wealth? Is there anything actions that you took that made this now become a reality for you, improved your business performance, and made you a wealthier
Yes.
person?
Yeah, that's pardon me, excuse me. That is a very deep question, and it's a very good question. Let me give you an example. Let us imagine that I am going to go to New York City, and I've heard that there are dangerous parts of the city where people can attack you and try and rob you. Unfortunately, that's true. And on the airplane to New York City, I am reading a book on self-defense. And I read, chapter 1 is if somebody comes to you with a knife. Chapter 2 is if somebody comes to you with a gun. Each thing what you must do in order to deflect an attack where somebody is intent on causing you bodily harm and of robbing you of your money and your possessions. And I read all the way through the book. And finally the airplane lands in New York, and I'm very comfortable. I'm not at all frightened because I finished reading the book. And then I go for a walk from my hotel, and sure enough, I haven't been walking for more than 10 minutes that night when all of a sudden an arm comes around my neck and I feel a gun pushing into my ribs from the back. And what do I say? I say, hey, hold on a second. I remember that attacks from the back with a gun are in chapter 16, but just give me a second to refresh my memory of what I'm supposed to do. Or, let me just reach into my pocket and read the book again. Well, we all know that that's not going to work. And what the problem here is that I read that book and the information all ended up right in here, just like it was supposed to. But it never went from here to here. And what I'm pointing at, you may not be able to see, is my heart. And this is the most challenging 13 inches of travel. Because there are many things that we know inside of our heads, but they have not yet been translated. The only way for me to translate that thing was to go and spend a few months going 4 times a week to a karate or an unarmed combat studio and have a teacher instruct me and drill me and make me repeat the actions and repeat them until they are now in me. They're not just in my head. They're not just theoretical, but they're real. They're part of me. And that moment, when that is achieved, then when that unfortunate thug sticks a gun in my ribs, I'm going to intuitively, with no mental delay, I'm going to intuitively explode into action. And I'm going to, whether it's jamming an elbow into his throat or slamming my foot down on his inside, whatever it is, I will react very effectively. As a student, I learnt all the material on finance and business. I learned how money itself was a gift of God. Money is not something that people come up with by themselves. I learned why it is that money is a spiritual, not a physical object. I learned why there is a huge difference between making money and taking money. But all of that information was over here. It needed to be translated. And that was why I wrote Thou Shalt Prosper. And that is why I created an online training program called the Financial Prosperity Collection, because I wanted people to be able to access 10 hours of me teaching them and talking to them. And then the exercises at the end of each chapter allow everybody to start the process of transferring the information from the heart to the soul. From the brain to the soul, so as that the actions are become intuitive. Initially, they're not like that. Initially, what happens is that let's look at an example. One of the principles we have to learn is that before you get, you have to give. The way God created the system is you first have to do things for other people before you get anything back. And so you've got to provide something of value. Well, somebody comes into my store. I've just read Thou Shalt Prosper. I've taken the online course of the Financial Prosperity Collection. So all the information is here. And the person comes into my store and, I'm doing what I always do, which is I just ignore them and I take care of whatever work I'm doing. And then all of a sudden I said to myself, wait a sec, I remember I read something about this. I'm supposed to go over to that person and ask them how I can help them. What are they looking for? So after I've done that a few times, that then is like going to the karate studio or gymnasium and practicing. After I've done that a few times, I start reacting a little bit differently. And, ordinarily, socially, people would say, what do you do? And I would never say I'm a roofing contractor. I used to say, I'm in business. But then I wait a second. I read Thou Shalt Prosper, and I took the Financial Prosperity online program, the course. And now, wait a sec. I remember I'm not supposed to miss a single opportunity to tell people how I serve other human beings, how I serve God's other children. And so I said, wait a sec, that's right. And so I don't just say, I'm in business. I say, I am a very experienced roofing contractor. And I'll even go on and I'll say, and people sometimes have a little leak in their roof and they just ignore it. I'm the person who comes, fixes that, so you have no more problems with that. And pretty soon somebody comes up to me at the party and says, by the way, what is your phone number? I want to call you tomorrow. I think I do have a roof problem. I don't miss an opportunity to advertise, but I never used to do that. But because I start applying the lessons one by one, they start becoming part of me, and then I no longer have to think about them. It's like brushing my teeth. I don't actually think anymore about how to move the toothbrush. It's all automatic. And that's what we're aiming for.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I'm really pleased to meet you, Rabbi.
Likewise.
And to follow your lead, I'm a very experienced medical doctor.
Good for you.
So,
and if I
in
was
addition to that, I work in...
If I was in Aberdeen, I would come and see you.
I didn't hear that, sorry.
If I was in Aberdeen, I would come and see you and get some advice from you.
Okay, yeah, so in addition to that, I volunteer in the children's section in this congregation. So my question really is for the young ones, how do we begin to get them to be entrepreneurial, build these skills? Because for some people, we may already feel that our time is past, we missed it, we didn't know about it, and it may be too late for some of us. I don't think so, but I'm just saying, how do we then focus on the young ones? Seeing that they don't have this Jewish background you had, their parents, which are us, we didn't do any better because we didn't know better. How can we then, get them to learn these things and do better? Has this book, for example, your book, have you thought about doing a version for children, that can, and if you do it, please give me credit for for mentioning
Good for you.
it.
Very good. Very good. So, first of all, Doctor, let me just tell you that I don't think that there is a reason to say for us it's too late. And I know you expressed hesitation yourself about that, and I think you're right. No, it's not too late. One can always improve. It may be too late for some things, but one can always change. And you're a medical doctor. I'm sure you know, as I do, many doctors who do very well financially, and I also know many doctors who do very badly financially. Now, the difference between doctors who make money and doctors who don't make money has nothing to do with which medical school they went to. Because the truth is, most of us patients who go to the doctor, we don't know what medical school you went to. We don't even look at the sign on your wall. Actually, we don't even know that you really went to medical school. We know nothing. The reason we came to see you is because a friend of ours told us, oh, you got to go and see this doctor. She's terrific. And that's part of how you operate a business. And the difference between doctors who make money and doctors who do not make money has nothing to do with their medical skills. It has to do with their business and financial skills. And the doctors who make money realize that they are in business, even though they're medical doctors, but they're still in business. And when you're in business, your focus is on pleasing God's other children. Now, you might say that's having a good bedside manner or imparting confidence to your patient, but whatever it is, you do something that makes your patient come away feeling really good. And that has to do with business, not with medicine. That's nothing they teach you in medical school. And so we can all improve in whatever field we're in. We have to all realize that we're in business, almost every one of us. But the question about children is really important. And to just answer your last question first, I have not yet thought about doing a children's version. And the reason I'm just busy, and there are other projects I'm more excited about that I'm working on. But what I should do is talk to one of my own children who are now more grown and older, and to see if one of them would like to undertake the job of co-writing one with me. Now, that would be an interesting idea. Or even one of my older grandchildren could actually co-write a version of that for children, which actually is an interesting idea. And please send me an email with your name and details, Doctor, so that I will have it handy, that if I do it, I will give you credit. What to do with imparting, it's not even an entrepreneurial skill, because, children have to finish their education, they're not yet, but giving them an understanding of money is hugely important. So I'll tell you, one of the things we did with our son is when he was 10 years old, we encouraged him to get a job. And he said, well, how am I going to get a job? And he didn't know that we had arranged already with a building contractor who was a friend of ours to hire him for a part-time job for a few hours, 3 or 4 hours every afternoon. Well, of course, it was completely illegal to hire 10-year-olds on a construction site, but we asked our friend to do that, and our son would come home at 5 o'clock every day, covered with dust. He was pushing a wheelbarrow with pieces of concrete in it from the construction site to a dump truck. He came home so exhausted he just fell asleep before supper. And he didn't complain, but he was having a hard time. And when he at the end of the week on Friday afternoon, our friend, the contractor, who was his boss now, came over with his money in cash in a little bag and in an envelope and gave it to him. And our son all of a sudden grew about 8 inches taller. He just walked differently. He'd made some money. It was a wonderful thing. And we carried that on for a few months. And it did him a lot of good, because at one point he came to me and said, "Dad, I don't want to do this kind of work for the rest of my life. Is there any way I can do what you do? Can I be in business? Can I try and serve people in another way than with my body, than carrying rocks?" And that was a very good, because once he asked the question, he was now in a position to genuinely want to learn. Another thing we did with all our children was that we didn't give them money for nothing. Now, sometimes this is hard. You've got to go against your instincts, because as parents, we love our children, and one of the characteristics of love is that it means you want to give to the recipient of your love. You want to be a giver, not a taker. And so we want to give our children money. But it's much better to let them earn it. And so every household, every family has chores, whether it's washing dishes or mopping the floor or cleaning the windows or getting the firewood in, whatever we had to do in our house. We used to let the children bid for the work. And somebody would say, well, I'll do it for $3. Somebody else said, I'll do it for $2.60. And then we'd let the children make money by doing the things that in a normal family they would be expected to do anyways. And that way they learned the idea of economic exchange. And we think that that's quite an important thing. We then also gave each child 3 containers marked spend, save, give. And whatever money they got, they had to put 10% of it into the give jar, and they had to put 50% of it into the save jar, and then 40% went into the spend jar. And that was also because that helped them see how saved money accumulates and what you can do when you've got a big pile of it instead of just a small amount you get every week. So those are some of the things that I would put down in a book for parents as to how to instill an understanding of money in your children. It's very important. You'll be amazed. After 2 years of this, the entire mode of thinking of children is completely different.
So much. Thank you for that. Thank you.
Mr. Nyoma, do you have a question? I know you had one question about...
Yes. So thanks for that, Rabbi, for that explanation. So just follow up on the being in business. That we all are encouraged to. There was a question that was also raised in one of our discussions, and they said that look, the book, there's so much focus on, on us, encouraging us to be in business rather than being an employee. So I wanted to get you to explain better under the commandment 2, which is on a network of your connectedness.
Yes.
It says something about the traditional Jews. They understand the difference between being a wage slave and being in business. And we're all encouraged to be in business. Are you able to just explain that a bit for us and for the listeners as well? Just the being a wage slave and being in business.
Yeah. Well, what this has to do with is adjusting what I call your spiritual schematic. What I mean by that is that, let me give you an example. Sometimes I will talk to people who might call in on a radio show or a television show, and they'd say, after I was talking about the importance that marriage and family play in finance, there really is a relationship between what you feel about marriage and family and finance. And somebody would say to me, look, you know, I'm not interested in ever having children. I don't want to have children. Sometimes they say, I don't want to have children because it's bad for the environment and every child has a big carbon footprint. I don't want to destroy the world. Well, I'm very skeptical of people who don't want to destroy the world. But at any rate, they say that's why they don't want to have children. Or sometimes people say, I don't have children because they just take everything you've got and you waste your life looking after them. People give different reasons, and they say they don't want to have children. What I then do is I try to lull them into a temporary state of complacency, and I let them relax a little bit from that emotional intensity of telling me they don't want to ever have children. And then after a little while, I say to them, by the way, I'd be very interested to know something about your background. Tell me about the family you grew up in. Well, I know this won't come as a surprise to you, but almost everybody answers the same way. They start telling me of growing up in a dysfunctional home. Their parents were a broken marriage and terrible, terrible, terrible childhood background. It's no surprise that if you grow up in a background like that, yeah, you probably do not want to have children. I get that. But that's never what people say. They never say, oh, I grew up in a terrible child background, so I don't want to have... It's always, I don't want to introduce children to this terrible world. This is a world of suffering and pain. Why should I bring a child in? Or this is a world where we've got to protect the environment. I don't want to bring a child who's going to use up all the resources of the world. Or, I don't want to bring in a child who's going to need to use fossil fuel, etc., etc. That's how a spiritual schematic works. A spiritual schematic is something imprinted on your soul deep inside that impacts how you think, even though you may come up with other reasons to try and explain why you think that way. But everybody knows that it's really because of that spiritual schematic that was imprinted on your soul. Well, it is very important, and I teach on my online program, the Financial Prosperity Collection, I teach how to imprint the correct spiritual schematic on your soul. So your question was, we have to, everyone has to be in business rather than to just be a wage slave, which is a good phrase you used. Well, in reality, not all of us have that option. Right now, particularly if it's early in you might be a wage slave. So what are you supposed to do? Quit and try and start a business? No, of course not. You haven't saved up any money yet. You don't have capital. You don't have enough experience. Of course not. You have to keep your job. Well, then what about having, No, I'm not talking about what you have to do. I'm talking about your spiritual schematic. Even if you are a wage slave, you've got to think about yourself as an independent business professional. And you must have a board of directors of your company. You can call your company, if your name is James, call it James Limited or James Incorporated, whatever you want. And your company, even though you're a wage slave, you go off to work at 7 o'clock every morning. But in your mind, you are actually an independent business professional. You're an entrepreneur. How does that work? Well, let's imagine that James, shall we say, is... just for argument's sake, James drives a bus for the local bus company. All right, does that work? And James now has to say to himself, I am an independent business professional providing transportation services. All right, if you are an independent business professional, James, how many customers do you have in your business? At the moment, James will say, I only have one customer. Who's your customer? My customer is the local city bus company. They buy my services from me. Do you see the difference in outlook here? It's not I work for them. I work for me. They buy my services. And what's more, at the moment, it's my only customer, but it doesn't have to remain my only customer because I work Monday to Friday. On Saturday, I could provide driving services for the local taxi company, driving people to the airport. Now I have 2 customers. But if you only think of yourself as a wage slave, it'll never occur to you to try and generate a secondary source of revenue. And so being an independent business professional is your spiritual schematic. I don't go and ask the bus company to give me a raise. No, that's not what business owners do. Business owners raise their prices. You sound completely different. When you go to the local bus company, James, and you ask them to give you an increase in pay, you come across as a supplicant, begging. But when you have absorbed the correct spiritual schematic of an independent business professional, you are going to the bus company and telling them you're raising your price. The end result is the same, you get a raise, but you're much more likely to get it. So that is just a little bit of the program I teach on how to install the correct spiritual schematic. Does that answer your question?
Yes, that's exactly what I was expecting. Thank you.
So I have another question, Rabbi. I think it was in chapter 2, you talked about the importance of building your network. I use that amazing story about Esau. I just love how you explained it. We all need, if you want to be successful, you need other people. So that was great. The story there was good. So my question really is, we now know most things are digital. Most businesses have gone online. And so to be successful, we need to move online as well. The problem is that some people are introverts. They don't feel, you hear people say, oh, I'm not comfortable going to Facebook. I don't have a Facebook account. They want to keep away, So based on what you've taught now, does it mean that you really have to sort of improve your skills of being an extrovert, really, to go out there, connect with people? Do you have to do that then?
I really like you. I really like you. You're asking me really good questions. The hardest thing for me is when I agree to do an interview and I can quickly tell, in the first 5 minutes, I can tell that the people have never read my book. And it becomes a very arduous and grueling interview. And I keep looking at my watch to see how quickly it'll be finished. But you're asking wonderful questions, and it's obvious that you've thought a lot about these ideas. And so it's a real pleasure for me to have this time interacting with you. Thank you. Your question is terrific. Let me go back to when I was 14 years old. When I was 14 years old, like many adolescents, I broke out in pimples. My whole face had pimples. I remember spending all my money on lotions and chemicals and medications to try and get the pimples off my face. And thank God they eventually went away. I don't think it had anything to do with the medications. I think time took care of it. But looking back on it, why did I not say, hey, everybody, I'm a pimply guy. Happy to meet you. That's all there is to it. Why was I so intent on changing that? And I realized because at some level I knew that it would diminish my ability to have friends. and to easily connect, because people would poke fun at it, they'd look at my face. And so I really spent all the money I could make on various medicines that promised to clear my complexion. But I never, ever decided, I never thought even for a moment of accepting the situation and saying, oh, I'm a pimply guy. In the same way, if somebody is introverted, that is not a normal condition. And nobody should say, oh, I'm introverted, that's just who I am. You should fix it up, just like I fixed up my face. And this is what's hard to understand. And again, this is part of absorbing the correct spiritual schematic into our souls. And that is that when God said in the 2nd chapter of Genesis, it's not good for man to be alone, it is true that he was speaking about Adam's matrimonial prospects and that he was now going to bring woman into the world. But that's not all that he's talking about. He's talking about all human beings for all time. It's never good for people to be alone and disconnected. It's not healthy. Now, you are all busy professionals, just like I am, and when I hear the words solitary confinement, there's a part of me that thinks it's kind of like a reward for busy people. Oh, boy, I'd love to get solitary confinement for a day so I could catch up on my reading. You know, give me some solitary confinement. But no, the word solitary confinement is a terrible torture that they impose on people who are incarcerated in jail. Solitary confinement is a torture. It's a terrible thing. If I had my way, it would be prohibited. It's too unbearable. Because nobody ever loses his mind from being surrounded by too many people. But you can go mad from being alone. God did not create us to be alone. He created us not to be alone. It's not good for man to be alone. And so, in the same way that my complexion can get sick and develop pimples, and I want to try and get rid of them, in the same way, my being and my personality can get sick, and I start being an introvert. Now, look, I was an introvert by nature, and even to this day, in order to recharge my batteries and to replenish myself, especially if I'm on a 1-week lecture tour and I'm doing one speech after another, at the end of that, when I get home, I need a day by myself, to just have quiet. And my wife knows, just let him stick in his study for a few hours, because I'm an introvert. But I have used the principles of ancient Jewish wisdom to cure that part of me, so as that I do seek out company, and I seek out the opportunity to be with other people. And when I am with other people, I do not retreat into the corner and hover by myself. I introduce myself, I get around, I talk to people. All of that is part of a deliberate exercise and course to overcome the sickness of being introverted. So I'm not being rude. I'm not telling anyone who's introverted, hey, you're a sick human being. But I'm telling you that introvertedness is not the natural condition, any more than pimples are a natural condition. And in the same way, there are ways to cure pimples. There are ways to cure being an introvert. It doesn't mean you have to be an extrovert. It doesn't mean you have to be the life and the soul of the party. It doesn't mean you have to constantly be babbling away nonstop. No. But it means that you must really love being around other people. You must teach yourself and train yourself to love being connected with other people.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Rabbi. If we go on to chapter 10, thou shalt not retire. That's my phrase for it anyway. Never retire. It's an interesting chapter which really resonates with me, because something that I've come to receive as a truth, and I talk about it a lot. And I've had your book for many years, interestingly, but I already had this concept before I read that. Now, that concept, never retire, is so contrary to the current culture, which, for example, says, when elderly people, you take them out of even their in some places, you put them in a place, where they are disconnected from their families.
Terrible.
So I find that, almost so antithetical to the nature that God created. So I don't even want to speak about that in relation to the culture that seems to be developing largely in the Western civilization of putting, as it were, all the people to pasture, so to speak.
Yeah. Look, I grew up in Africa, and a lot of my heart is still in Africa. In my memory and my recollection, in Africa, the idea of putting old people in an old people's home, putting a retirement pattern, I do not remember that as being part of African culture. It was not there when I was a child. It is part of Western culture today. And it is obviously, it's a mistake. It is not correct. Now, that's not to say that we are not encouraging people to be able to have financial security as they age. Absolutely we are. We absolutely want people to build up assets and to build up investments. Oh yeah. But not ever to stop working. It's unfortunately it's tragic, but I'm sure you've seen it in your experience, and especially the doctor has seen, generally speaking, not always, but generally speaking, the health of retired people deteriorates. People who continue working stay healthy longer. And there's two ways to understand that. The theological way of understanding it is that God said, I put you on this earth to help other people, to do things, to be part of, connected with other people. If you're now going to spend your life just playing golf, I don't need you on this world anymore. Who needs you? For what? And the other way of looking at it, of course, is that we are human beings. We are created in the image of God. Just as God is a creator, we too are creators. And we live to create, and we create to live. And if we stop working, is an act of creation. If we stop working, our entire zest for life evaporates. So I think it's very unhealthy to retire. I think it's morally wrong to retire. Think about my plumber. Right? I live in an old house, and there's always something going wrong. A tap over here, a pipe over there. And for years already, I've been calling Thomas the plumber. All of a sudden, a pipe breaks, water is pouring out of the wall. I pick up the phone, I call Thomas the plumber. He answers, and he says, oh, hi, Rabbi Lapin. I haven't seen you for a few months. And I say, Thomas, please come over quickly. He says, what, haven't you heard? I said, what? Heard what? He says, Rabbi Lapin, I retired last week. I had a big retirement party. I can't come to your house now. I'm going to play golf at St. Andrews. And so I say to him, Thomas, how dare you do that? You're telling me that you've made enough money, so you're totally selfish. You never really cared about me. You were only in this for you. And now that you've made enough, you're gone. Me, I got a problem. I always thought you cared about me because whenever I phoned, you came over. And now I see I was wrong. You're a different sort of human being. It's a terrible thing. Why? Why would he suddenly stop serving me? Why would he do that? It's all wrong. And it follows from there, obviously, that to take the old person and put him in an old age home instead of him growing old with his family and in the company of his children and grandchildren, that's also a terrible thing. So the biblical vision of aging and of retirement is very different from Western civilization.
Thank you very much for that. And
I shouldn't say Western civilization. I should say Western culture.
Culture, yes, indeed. Because you write in the book, you're able to trace the fact that it was not always like this. It's in a sense a recent development over the last 200 years or so, where we have this concept. Yeah.
It's really wonderful talking to people who understand all of this. It's great. Thank you.
Okay, go back to the panel. I think someone had a question there.
Hello. Yes, it's me again. So thanks once again, Rabbi. Again, so many for us to learn from the book. One of the things that we also read was on the commandment on leadership, leading constantly and consistently. There's so many wonderful concepts. I mean, for me personally, there's so many things from a leader must have facts and faith and a whole lot of other things. But there's an area that, again, we had a lot of conversation on, and he talked about confrontation. Leaders, confrontation is often necessary for us to achieve results as leaders. And the example, there was a story about the children of Jacob, Judah and the other 11 brothers, and how Judah failed to confront his brothers when they were about to sell Joseph. And because of that, the phrase that was used is that Judah descended from his brothers. That means he lost his leadership. And he came back when Joseph became a prime minister, and he regained his leadership because he kind of courageously demanded that they can't leave Benjamin in Egypt and go home to their father. And again, that word confrontation, we had a lot of discussion on it. Should a leader be confrontational? Because there are other concepts about leadership regarding using subtle ways to get things done, being more emotionally intelligent, and those concepts. So I wanted you to throw more light in and around a leader being confrontational.
Okay, you've actually just demonstrated one of the most important characteristics of a leader, and that is specificity. What I mean by that is that sometimes I have an interview where the questioner says to me, Rabbi Lapin, your chapter about leadership is very interesting. Talk more about it. That is not the way a leader operates. If I'm the leader of a company that runs an electrical power station, for instance, I can't walk into the power station and say, what's wrong here? I have to be specific, and I have to show that I understand what's going on, and I can drill down to the detail. And you did exactly the same thing. You didn't just say, speak more about confrontation. You were very specific. You've hemmed me into exactly what you want me to talk about. You are leading me exactly where you want me to go. And I'm not sure that the English language is necessarily the best at this, because I don't know. I would say that confrontation, being ready for confrontation, doesn't mean that you are a confrontational person. Confrontational means that you provoke confrontation. It means that your nature is to almost precipitate and to trigger argument and head butting going on, which is clearly and obviously a bad thing. I mean, to whatever extent you can generate consensus in your group is obviously valuable. But the obstacle that many people have with leadership is being able to handle confrontation when it is necessary. You may have had this experience as well as with me, but I've had a number of people who tell me, and I say, why? At this stage, I would have thought you would be higher up in your company. And they say, yes, you're right. I turned down promotion. I say, really? Why did you turn down promotion? And they say, because I didn't want to have to issue instructions to people who used to be my former workmates. There is an example of somebody who's frightened of confrontation. If you are promoted, yes, you are now going to have to go to your workmates and you're going to have to say, guys, this is awkward for me and for you, but life fills us with challenges, and I know we're all up to it. Up till now, we've all been operating as colleagues and associates, and we had somebody directing us and supervising us. Now I have been made that person. And so, although there's going to be a transition period of some discomfort for you and for me, and I will apologize in advance for my role in causing that discomfort, I'm sorry, but it's necessary. I don't see a way around it. From now on, I am going to be having to supervise you and give you directives. That's a confrontation. And it's hard to find those words and to look your friends in the eye and say, this is how we're going to have to go from here onwards. That is being able to handle confrontation when it arises. Another area in which leaders will sometimes lack the ability to handle confrontation, and again, none of this has to do with being confrontational. Another area is being able to have confrontation with yourself, and that's the hardest. Where sometimes, as a leader, you have to talk to yourself, and you've got to say, look, you're not performing up to it yet. Why haven't you done this? Your head told you you should be doing this already. Why haven't you done it? That's called leading yourself effectively, and you've got to be able to confront yourself. And you've got to say, well, yeah, my head knew that I have to do it, but I lacked the discipline and the willpower to make sure that I did what I was supposed to do when I was supposed to do it. Okay, fine. Well, yourself, stop doing that. You're going to have to get this right. It is much more comfortable for people to bypass that and to not face that internal confrontation. But if you do, you condemn yourself to stagnation. Do you follow? Does that make some sense?
Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you. Just on that last point, so confrontation there is more like having a frank discussion. It's not confrontation in the sense of fighting, you know. Okay, so thank you for that.
Yeah, that's
my
probably
question
a better way of
is,
putting it.
Sorry.
I think you're right. Saying a frankness and a candid encounter is maybe better than using the word confrontation.
So my question is, so one of the major mindset shifts in the book was really moving from thinking of business as something not right, you know, to seeing it as service. So for me, another word for business is service, really. You're serving people. And then you went on to teach about how it's important to, you know, derive joy and satisfaction in providing a service for people. I think that's a good way of looking at it. Now, the problem is that I think for many people, they don't see their work as, they don't have joy and satisfaction in it. For them, it's a means of putting food on the table. It's just something that pays the bill, you know? So how important is it really to have joy and satisfaction in that service, in your work? How important is that?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's hugely important. I don't know. I don't remember. I think from the time I lived in the United Kingdom, I remember they did have lotteries of one kind or another. I don't remember the details, but in the United States, there are many different lotteries. And here's one of the most interesting phenomena that I've noticed, and this is pretty well known. It's easy to find out the names of people who won huge sums of money in a lottery, and then you can find out how they did after that. Would you believe me when I tell you that it is almost impossible to find people whose lives got better after they won a lot of money? Almost everybody's lives went downhill. But they achieved everybody's dream of suddenly having a tremendous sum of money dropped in their lap. Why did things go so badly? Because there is an element of almost a solipsistic attitude, an inward-looking attitude, an egotistical attitude, a selfish attitude. It's what I want. And I wish I had £1 million. Oh, goody, I won the lottery. Now I got what I want. People who win a lot of money are almost always miserable. People who earn a lot of money are nearly always happy. I'm not saying money makes happiness, but it's like oxygen. It's necessary. It's not enough by itself, but it is necessary. And there's a big difference between getting money and earning money or making money. And so if people look at their livelihood as nothing but how you make a living, and that's why, by the way, when I sit next to a stranger on an airplane, we start talking, I never say, what do you do for a living? I always say, how do you serve God's other children? And then the person always looks at me like, well, excuse me? Like, what did you just say? I asked you, how do you serve God's other children? He said, I don't know what you mean. I said, well, let me ask you in general terms, what do you do from Monday to Friday from 8 o'clock to 5 o'clock? He said, I work. I said, well, do you have clients or customers? He said, of course. I said, well, then those are the people who are God's other children who you are serving. How do you serve them? What do you do? And it always leads to an interesting conversation because it's a major shift in spiritual schematic. It's a huge transition to suddenly start realizing I'm in this to serve other people. I'm not in this to get stuff. The money I make and the money I earn is incidental. It is a consequence to what I'm doing, but it's not the foundational cause of what I do. I do this because I get a kick out of serving God's other children. And it makes a very big difference. It's necessary to gain that mindset. And after a while, as a doctor loves her patients in a certain way, you're a much better doctor if you love your patients. Now, I know in medical school they told you, don't get personally involved with your patients, you won't be able to live, no, but any good doctor discovers that you can't be utterly dispassionate. You do feel involved and connected with your patient, and that's a good thing. And that is true for Thomas the plumber. He really cares about taking care of me. I know he does. I mean, I see he doesn't just do the job. He leaves the workplace neat and tidy. When he did work in the kitchen, my wife didn't have to clean up after him. He did a great job, and he cleaned up after himself. He cares about me. And for that reason, he's a happier person and he is a wealthier person. He makes more money that way as well. And so we put a lot of effort into helping people adjust their mindset or transition to a different spiritual schematic that shows that they go to work not to put food on the table. Food on the table is the consequence. Food on the table is proof that they did serve other people. But the core purpose of the undertaking is to serve other human beings. Very important.
Thank you so much. Wow, we have, Rabbi, you've said so much, and I can imagine we've all been challenged. I've just been sitting here and just everything about being confrontational and, being a better leader. To even, I jotted down the entrepreneurial skills, and exactly what you said, I wrote that down. I'm like, my future kids, I'm going to do exactly what you did with them to my kids, because I think it's so important. I feel growing up, I didn't quite get introduced to money as early as I would like, because down the line I find that, I've got this entrepreneurial spirit, and I'm like finding my way and wading through at 25. But that's okay. And reading this book is amazing because my mind is being blown, and by the grace of God, I will grow in this financial journey. So for all the audience watching, if you have any questions, please type it down at the comments, and I would like to see them. If you have any questions for the rabbi, do let me know. I've got one question to ask the rabbi, as the session is rounding up. And so the question, it's more about, I know from everything you've said, you have this vast knowledge of finance and money and how to make wealth. And I'm curious to know if you've got any fresh insight for us, from over the years, because I know you wrote this book in 2002. Am I right?
Yeah? Yes.
So now it's 2022. It's 20 years down the line. Do you have any fresh insight on, creating money, creating wealth, especially now? COVID has happened in this unprecedented time. A lot of changes have happened to the economy and people's ability to make wealth. A lot of things have changed. So do you have any insight on that?
That's another great question. Your questions are all quite wonderful. Did we are we taping and recording this session or not?
Yes, it's been recorded.
Yeah. Recorded, yes.
Good. I'm pleased, because I think your questions have taken us into some very important areas. Yes. One of my foundational slogans and spiritual schematics is that the more that things change, the more we must depend upon those things that never change. I want to say that one more time. The more that things change, the more we must depend upon those things that never change. It is very easy to think that cultural, political, sociological changes in the world around us are huge, and they're profound, and they're significant, and they may be. But what they also do is they camouflage how much things stay the same. And so, when prior to COVID, I used to travel for business about 120 days a year. And I did something interesting. I had a grandfather who was in business, and he was in business before commercial aviation was normal. I discovered, I set out to research how many days a year did he travel for business. And the answer is almost exactly the same as me, about 120 days a year. Now, he didn't travel by airplane, he traveled by train and by car. And he didn't spend the night sleeping in a luxury hotel. He spent the nights sleeping in very uncomfortable places sometimes. But other than that, it's remarkable how similar our lives were. When I travel, I can pick up my phone and call my wife while I'm traveling, easy as anything. When he traveled, he had to wait till he could arrive at a place where there was a public telephone. Okay, these are small differences, and maybe they're bigger than small. But fundamentally, there's not a world of difference between two men who both travel 120 days a year on business. And so it's important for us to realize how little things have changed, even when superficially there are big changes going on around us. In the final analysis, I like eating ideally 3 meals a day. That's exactly like my grandfather. And actually, it's exactly like his grandfather. And I also like being able to take care of my family. Well, that's exactly like my grandfather and like his grandfather. The point I want to make is that it's easy to see all the huge changes taking place around us. It's harder to see the ways in which things are still the same. And so, although the tools are different, I use an airplane, my grandfather uses a car, but we both were obsessive about taking care of our customers and our clients. That does not change. And so it's very important that, I can't stress this enough, it's very important that we don't allow technological incandescence to blind us to the basics that don't change. My grandfather had to show a profit at the end of every month. I also have to show a profit at the end of every month. My grandfather knew that he should save some money. I know I have to save some money. All the important areas have not changed. It's only the tools that have changed. Sometimes there's inflation. Fine, I have to build that factor into my business planning. Sometimes there's deflation. Well, I have to build that factor into my planning, and so on and so forth. When Solomon said there's nothing new under the sun, we must pay attention to that also.
Thank you so much, Rabbi. This has been so, for us, it's been so transformational. I mean, in the sense that we read a book, we spent so much time in the book, and now we're able to speak with you, and there's nothing more blessed than that. And also,
I appreciate it also because you all made the huge investment of time to study the book. So for me, it's a privilege to spend this time together with you, and I appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you so much. Now that we've established a relationship, when some point in time when you're in the UK, we would love to have you physically in Aberdeen and have a nice workshop. I noticed you talked about the online training, to practicalize the knowledge in the book, and so I do encourage folks to go in there, and between ourselves, we will check. Yeah, okay, the website is right there on top, the www.rabbidaniellapin.com. And also when you go into YouTube, you find lots of videos as well too. But let's take this thing further. Let's then turn this into muscle, and let's grow the muscle for the knowledge that we have received. It's like we've received the tonic and all of that. Let's go do something with it, so that in the months and years to come, we can look back and say this was really transformational, and that we did something with it. And then now, of course, we'll get we'll be satisfied, we'll be fulfilled, and we'll have more resources for ourselves, for our families, and also to give out as well too. And principally to give out to God's work, God's kingdom, and to also give out to those around us, so we can be of better use to those around us. So thank you so much for everyone who's come. And we noticed that we didn't get any comments or any questions from the social media, YouTube, Facebook. It must be either because everything is just soaking in, or not. So this is being streamed directly to YouTube and Facebook, so it's available there. People can just go in there and they will find it. We'll send the link to you, Rabbi, as well.
Please, thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you.
And back to Rabbi to close. She is the I don't know what you call it. She owns this platform. So that life.
Oh Wow. It's been a pleasure to have you, Pastor Mark. It's been a pleasure to have you, Rabbi Daniel Lapin. I am so excited for the privilege. And yes, to all the viewers at Sunday Night Live, how about that? We had Rabbi Daniel Lapin here with us. That's super exciting. And as you know, we're here every Sundays at 6 to 7 usually. And so I would encourage you to keep tuning in as we continue to create content for you. And until next time, my name is Rabbi Edmond Tamnabo, and have a good night, everyone.